Oh, there we go. All right. Great. Okay. Looks like we're live again. Great. How's it going, everybody? I wanted to start by uh, bringing up something interesting that happened on yesterday's stream. If you were here, um, so first of all, we're here streaming because uh, I this channel kind of looks at lots of different ideas and political ideas, economics related stuff, right? And I like to say, like, here's what's wrong with this idea, here's what's wrong with that belief, and so on. That's kind of what I do on this channel. It's kind of the purpose of it, and the purpose of this whole stream, which should take at least a couple of months, but of streaming like every day for about an hour, um, is to show everything that's wrong with so-called anarcho-capitalism, because the the main problem being that it's not anarchist, it's not even really part of the anarchist tradition, and it's pro-capitalist, which is really opposed to anarchism as well. Um, and it was funny that yesterday I was talking, because I was on this chapter about the NAP, the non-aggression principle. That's what you can see in front of you. Um, and I was saying, I was looking at my language because it was very much the language of ANCAP. Sorry, in case I haven't mentioned it yet today, this is my book that I wrote about 9 years ago and haven't looked at it. I used to be what's called an ANCAP, and I'm not anymore. I'm saying everything that's wrong with being an ANCAP. And I had mentioned everything wrong with kind of assuming your position is logical, assuming you understand the history as well as you think you do, assuming economics is like a science as distinct from just another kind of mess of theories that may or may not be valid. Um, and and somebody was here who apparently didn't hear the things I was saying about those things. In fact, I had just been talking about logic and mentioned history and the things that are wrong with it, especially the way ANCAPs use it. And someone came along and said, and basically said something like, in fact, I can say exactly in order. They said like, uh, learn, wait, which was it? Learn economics, learn history, learn logic, or it was one, and and I thought it was hilarious. It was like they were repeating the ANCAP mantra while I was saying everything that was wrong with it, you know, and they didn't listen or anything, but eventually they were kind of like, "Oh, this is all bullshit. I'm leaving." You're not interested in listening to me or whatever. And when really they weren't listening to me. And it's just, I just found it very ironic and yet so typical. It's exactly what you would have expected. It's right out of the ANCAP playbook. And you might think that, um, I think the idea, the mentality is kind of that, like, if you just understood history better and you understood economics, then you would kind of naturally understand why being an ANCAP is correct, why anarcho-capitalism is the correct method. And I mean, it really doesn't. Especially since learning those things is what led me away from being an ANCAP. Like, first I learned lots of those things to begin with. Then I started hanging out with ANCAPs and listening to them and reading them. And I was like, yeah, this is right, must be right. And it all kept getting reinforced by these people saying like, yeah, that's logic, that's human nature, it's common sense, history dictates this, or economics proves that. And these are like, they're very, very limited perspectives. And so the more I learned of all those things, the more I realized that they weren't really true, and that anarchism just makes that much more sense. Let's see. Yeah, exactly. You, why listen when you've been told your entire life you're right? Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, and that's the thing. ANCAPs often do think like the capitalist state, even if not, they don't realize it. Let's read from here about property, and I'll see everything I can say that's wrong with it. I read this quote yesterday. Well, I'm gonna elaborate, I think. So let's take a look, shall we? Products of one's own labor are one's property. Well, I mean, we certainly it doesn't work that way now. And so whose property system? Things acquired illegitimately are not. Well, who's to say what is legitimate? Well, whoever decides on the nap, I guess. By way of example, imagine, by the way, I'm going to use three names, maybe just two, Tom and Derek, and that's because they're friends of mine. By way of example, imagine Tom walks into the wilderness, builds his own home, and starts a farm. He's transformed the land into something useful and valuable. He deserves it. It now belongs to him. Okay, well, we should probably start by questioning just this, alone. Tell me more about this land. Was there really nobody there? Really? It wasn't maybe land that might otherwise have belonged to indigenous people? Maybe. I mean, I'm almost in this paragraph. It's almost something from Locke. It's almost like something from John Locke to say, you know, that you just kind of mix your labor with the land, right? Whichever land. Don't worry about, whose land, or don't think about the history of the land. Don't worry about the animals, the plant life. Don't worry how it's going to affect people, the environment, cultures, and so on. Don't worry about that. That's irrelevant. Except it isn't irrelevant anymore. It was all, maybe in classical liberalism, this kind of thing made sense, but, but nowadays the same classical liberals are saying these things as if there were no other considerations, and so that's what I was. So it can happen. I mean, we had to read Little House on the Prairie as a kid, so this kind of thing can happen. Build your own home, start your own farm, that kind of thing. But it's way easier if you do it together. He deserves the land? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. He deserves it if you believe in the absolute value of property. But and that property comes from, again, like mixing your labor with the land. And that tends not to be the basis of property rights. They tend more to be just the state, kind of decides. Then imagine Derek, that bastard, comes along and seizes part of his land. What claim does Derek have to that land? Well, what if he's just hungry? To me, that's a legitimate claim now. I mean, sure, ideally, Derek would might make his own farm or something next door. Maybe. Again, we'd have to ignore all other considerations, but, he might make his own farm next door and they can trade with each other. I think that's kind of the ANCAP idea. But making your own farm takes time. I mean, what if he's hungry in the meantime and he has no food or shelter of his own? That comes to the next line. Tom, in fact, has the right to defend his property, as he does himself. And that's why you get jokes about ANCAPs that, they'll shoot you for going on their lawn or something, which is supposedly not true. Was there a genocide committed there so that it's free land, so the land like is unoccupied? Exactly, the kind of consideration you need to ask. Um, and so like Tom should be able to shoot people for like say trespassing or stealing their vegetables or something. No. No, in fact, I mean, some people would say you have an obligation to give this person food. I don't know. I don't know if I think that or not, but um, definitely, it doesn't seem right to say this is my land and my food, and you can't even like trespass on it. You can't have any of the food, no matter how hungry you are, even if you don't have any money and so on, you can't work. What if they just can't work? What if you said, okay, here, you can come work for me, and then I'll give you food. But what if they couldn't, or something? Oh, well, too bad. Keep moving. And this kind of thing even kind of encourages a less charitable um, way of thinking. It's like, look, if you can't get this stuff for yourself, it should be easy. If you can't do that, you know, then it's too bad. You're a loser or something. Derek claims property is theft because Tom is forcing Derek off his land. Well, yeah, Tom's forcing Derek off land that is owned, like you say you own it, so you're forcing me off. Really, I mean, see, now I've actually come to think this way. It's funny, like Derek claims this, and then a couple years later, I read was What Is Property by Proudhon, and I actually got the argument. One part of What Is Property actually that stuck with me was that kind of summarizes it. I think is when you say something like it says something like if you build an apple tree, like this is your apple tree, and they're your apples now. Well, first of all, who asked you to take that land in order to build an apple tree? Like you just assume that it was okay to do that um, overall. But when you do that, you're taking it so that it can't be used by anyone else. That part of land. It might not be a big deal if it's just an apple tree, but if you're taking huge swaths of land, and people do, then you're saying that this and everything it produces is now mine. Well, what if I'm hungry and there's no other way to get food? You've stolen that land for yourself. Um, However, the land would have been useless to Derek without the labor Tom put in. Not necessarily. In fact, historically, that's probably completely untrue because, of course, people, if agriculture was an invention, after all, people, they could get food before the advent of farming, and when you set up farms and private property everywhere, then the hunter-gatherer lifestyle has to stop. It has to end. It's put to rest, which means a whole culture is settled and destroyed in a way. Right? Hey, Rachel. Um, yeah, exactly. All the land would probably already be owned anyway. That's always been one of the points of against ANCAPs. That's right. Like, we live in an ANCAP world. Well, what if new people show up, right? And it's like, oh, well, there's no land for you. You're gonna have to go nowhere. You can't even die in the street because the street's privately owned too. Um, so like so this just isn't necessarily true. If this labor that Tom put in, like, yeah, it's to grow vegetables, but really it's to grow them kind of very efficiently in one plot of land as much as possible. It and that land could that like farming could have adverse environmental impact, so that even the land around it, um, like it doesn't work anymore. It might not grow vegetables anymore. Um, Animals. I mean, farming tends to kill a lot of animals. Um, I mean, the animals that would be there, that if you were like a hunter gatherer, you would be hunting. Laboring in a factory brings money that can be used to buy food. What is old me even implying here? Like, just go work in a factory until you can buy food. Laboring on a farm brings the food. Derek is trying to force Tom to give up property previously unowned and useless, to other humans, which Tom has transformed into something useful. So this is like the first time, well, not the first time in the book, but one of the first times in the book that I actually acknowledge that ancapism isn't the only anarchism, when really it's not at all. Green anarchists point out not all land is useless. Not only is living in harmony with nature man's natural state, humankind's natural state, humans don't necessarily have a claim to seize and transform all land everywhere. That's particularly true if it'll harm living things. Taking over a field and putting down a factory raises different moral questions that I don't address here, which probably should. Owning a forest as a nature conservancy would be legitimate. And actually, I get into this later as an idea, like owning nature. Private concerns owning nature, which I definitely do not think is a good idea anymore. Let's see. The right to property means if one or more people choose to live in a house and live by their own rules, again, not harming anyone else, even in the middle of town, they should not be ruled, harassed, or bullied by those outside. Yeah, this is actually secession. And I'm just fine with secession. There's a whole chapter on that later. It's great in theory, although I don't know, it's not very easy in practice, but I'm all for it. Like this is, I mean, I agree with this, that you should have this freedom, although is it the right to property? You could say so, and I think, again, Proudhon might say yes, because he said property is theft, property is impossible, but property is freedom, and this could have been, like, this could have been construed in the same way, that property is freedom, because if you kind of have, you have, let's say, this much land, and you're like secessionist, right? And the feds try to beat you back, but you can protect that land, and you could say that's your property, and in that sense, property is freedom. And I mean, Proudhon, he's not. Well, a lot of modern anarchists don't even really agree with him on a lot of things. So I'm not saying he's right and wrong, but you could say that this is property is freedom, put in practice. I would still be against calling it property, but like I said yesterday, that's a bit of just a question of semantics. Collectivist ideas. This is supposed to be bad. Because remember, if you're an ANCAP, individualism good, collectivism bad. Collectivist ideas like democracy and nationalism work against this right. Well, that's true. Although maybe, well, it depends a bit what democracy is. Here, in this book, I'm defining democracy as like the liberal democracy that we're told is democracy. And I've always been against nationalism. A propertyless society would be one where others would not be punished for taking something someone else had acquired legitimately. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I want now. Old Chris. Communal property is usually fine in small societies, but when we don't know or don't like those who want to take from us, we should have the right to refuse. Yeah, sort of. It's hard to say how far that right goes, though, right? Like if somebody was really hungry and they're like a Nazi or something, and you were like, nah, I'm not gonna feed you, screw you, I would understand. I'd be like, yeah, yeah, let him eat hatred. um, but what if they're not? What if it's just this part? When we don't know the person, we just don't know them. Is it such a big deal to like share with them? And then I actually bring up Stephen Kinsella. It's funny, I haven't even seen this name for years. But he's just a well-known ANCAP, and he's an IP lawyer who's against IP. Stephen Kinsella explains the whole idea. Our body or property is assigned to the person with the best link to the resource, so as to avoid conflict and permit peaceful, productive use of the resource in question. Yeah, I mean, if that was all there was to it, then that would be great. But this isn't a reason for private property per se. It's more of a justification for like stewardship. I don't know if that's the right word, but so for example, like you could take indigenous stewardship of land as probably the best example. It's not exactly that they own the land and you're not allowed on it. You're not allowed to touch it, and you're not allowed to grow your own food on it or whatever. It's not that people are proposing, really. It's more like, like it's okay to set up certain rules about like what not to do to nature, because that'll screw it up, that'll ruin it, right? And I mean, you can say the same thing about a home. Like it's assigned to the person with the best link to the resource. Well, if like if there are four people who live in this house, then those four people own it in a sense. But there are certain other questions that need to arise. um, yeah, like maybe four people own this house, but what if it was like an enormous house that like hundreds of people could sleep in, and then you go, no, only these four people are allowed in. Well, what about homeless people? You don't have a couple of rooms for them, you know? What if they just slept in a tent on your lawn? They're not allowed to do that either. All right. No, nothing like that. So just because you're assigning it to the best link doesn't mean that like all property by this system is legitimate. Property is necessary because of scarcity. Well, you could just as soon argue that scarcity is a result of property. You know, would things be scarce if they weren't all privately owned? Cap endorsing squatting. Um, Not me. I endorse squatting, sure. But not as an ANCAP, I didn't. No, I don't think so. Because, but I don't know, maybe, it's complicated. It's not necessary that property is individually owned, however, or protected with literally any kind of force. I think this was my concession to the side of me that wasn't like extreme ANCAP. Because like, hey, it could be owned by a tribe, doesn't have to be, like, you don't have to shoot the people. That's not necessarily legitimate, shooting someone for trespassing. All resources are contestable. Where did I get that? And if we want to avoid conflict over such resources, we should respect the right to property based on self-ownership. No, we shouldn't. No. No, in fact, yeah, conflict may still occur, of course, but the ownership principle makes clear who's the aggressor. Well, I mean, the thing is, we already have a system of property rights. We already, like, live under a system with enshrined property rights. And conflict over scarce resources is daily. It's not like, and even you can institute a nap among as many people as you want, but there's still going to be people who say like, I don't respect your claim, and they could have good reasons, And I think, and I think it's really scarcity, like it's ownership of things that's led to scarcity. Like you could say, um, we don't have enough food, but we do have enough food. It's not scarce, it's that it's owned and behind closed doors, see? And that's because of property. Property norms enshrine that. There are houses, there are homes for everybody, but because of ownership, because of property, not everyone's allowed to have their own home. So I mean, and I mean that kind of thing obviously leads to conflict of one kind or another. Like that kind of thing's inevitable. So you can say like, hey, look, these homeless people are squatting in this building that I own, that I've never even been in my life. Who's the aggressor in that situation? Homeless people just because they're in your building because you own it? Well, when I was an ANCAP, yes. But of course I don't think that now. You know? Like they should be allowed to, like, what? Oh, no, they shouldn't be allowed to sleep in someone else's building. Well, they don't have any other building. Let them. Ownership of property thus solves the tragedy of the commons. See, this is another assumption that a very commonly held assumption, of course, not just, not just by like ANCAPs or whatever, but the tragedy of the commons. And we could spend hours on this, of course, but I kind of just disagree with the idea of the tragedy of the commons. Back even before I was an ANCAP, I read something by like this guy. I think his name's Garrett Hardin on like the tragedy of the commons. But I don't know if it was very accurate. You know, um, it like is it a real thing the way people explain it? And this is me in this paragraph, like explaining the theory of the tragedy of the commons, but is it real? It still seems to be that property. Well, in fact, I'll get to that in a second. So, if I own something, I can get a large amount of benefit by taking care of it myself. All right. If it's public, anyone can use it and ruin it, and my taking care of it might not be worth it. Yeah, but then if it was public, um, like the public would have some say in what happens to it. Or again, it could be like a stewardship thing. And I mean, this is so abstract. What are we even talking about? Something? What is it? Is it your laptop? Yeah, great. That doesn't need to be public, although it could be if nobody else had one. Um, but like, but like it's not. What is something? Like, what if it's like a huge building or something? um, if the property is truly public, in the sense of being owned by nobody, no one is likely to benefit proportionally to the effort put into maintaining it. Hmm? Oh, proportionally to the effort into maintaining it, until people begin to homestead or squat the land, effectively turning it into private property. um, yeah. Really? So, so am I saying that we should like just privatize all land? I mean, this is a good example of how you can reach a point like this when you don't take history into account. This is basically an ahistorical, theoretical discussion of something. Let me see. Oh, I see. Oh, Arizona really has pro squatting laws? Really? That shocks me. But that's cool. I'm glad to hear that anyway. Shared toothbrushes. Yeah, no, I agree with all that. Yeah, you guys are right. Where was I? Oh yeah, that's right. I was talking about history because because this is a very ahistorical, theoretical account that could only, and that's how you can reach this kind of thing. I find, considering how much they talk about capitalism, ANCAPs really don't know the history of capitalism very well. I've always recommended the book The Invention of Capitalism by Michael Perelman um, as like a great book, on a very revealing book. It's the kind of thing that could turn you like from an ANCAP into, well, to push you left at least, into someone who wants to destroy the institution of capitalism, something like that. Because as it just explains in detail how laws were used to destroy the commons. See, they had the commons, but it was taken away, just like everything else, just like everything gets taken from regular people and privatized by the state and given to like private owners. All right. Small, simple societies don't need private property. Well, okay, although some do. Property has emerged in some places. It's just not the same kind of rigid, like Lockean ideals and stuff. Like a lot of other ideas. There are other ideas on property that you can look for. It's just not in the sense of like capitalist property. Small societies don't use their property to make a profit off the rest of the people around them. Where everyone knows everyone else, free riding is nearly non-existent, as if this was the real problem. I don't care much about free riders in a world where we still have enough of everything, but still like just can't be bothered to distribute it to people because of laws and property and stuff. I don't really care so much about free riders, but if I did, I would care about the really rich ones. Like they come up with an idea and make billions of dollars, and we go, well, if it weren't for that guy, we would never, he would never have this awesome idea that he had. Oh yeah? Did he do any of the other work? Did he do billions of dollars worth of work? History of capitalism? Yeah, history of capitalism? I think The Invention of Capitalism. I forget the rest of the title, but for sure. Oh yeah. People use shame as a tool to enforce reciprocal social obligations. I don't know why I brought that up there. That seems out of place. It's true. I don't get it. I think it's my way of saying you could try just shaming. In complex societies, all property that's not private is owned by the state, though the state also lays a claim to private property through taxation and outright seizure of land. Thus, whether statist societies have private property at all is debatable. Calling such things public property is misleading, as the public has little power to make decisions over them. The state is not the public. Well, this thing I would say is true that it's misleading. It's good if it's public property in the sense that anyone can use it and go there, but we should have there should be lots of public space, and the public should have a decision as to what goes into it. We can merely hope they get used for the purposes we approve of. When the benefit a politician or bureaucrat would gain by selling a piece of land to a developer outweighs the cost, he or she might well do so. Well, they do. Excuse me. They do all the time. Again, this is one of those things that I should be using history to illustrate. Sorry. If theft is defined as taking another person's property without that person's consent, God, ancaps and theft. It's like you would think it was murder. There's murder, and there's those other things I'm not going to talk about today. And then there's theft, whereas me, theft is so far down the list that I really don't even care about it much. And once property includes anything that you've earned, including money, this is also suspect. Do we earn money? Or why does one person earn a lot and I earn a little, and so on? Or made useful through one's labor. Derek can't use Tom's land without stealing from Tom, even though Tom has stolen from the land already. Tom, on the other hand, has not stolen from anyone, because no one had any legitimate claim over the land before he came along. We assume for this thought experiment. One question that arises, how much can he homestead? It's funny, there's a few words like this that I don't really define here. Anyway, but this I kind of get from like Murray Rothbard, I think, and he had some interesting ideas. He had like ideas that were, well, he has a very mixed bag, and he's mostly kind of, the right-wing libertarian type of thing, but he's also got some ideas that a lot of like ANCAPs would be like, what? Like, that's a bit left-wing or something. Like when he said that like all the slaves should be given reparations, and to the extent you can trace someone's slavery lineage, like even today, which was probably the 60s or something, like still they should be given reparations. And a lot of people were like, oh. And that's a pretty cool thing to say, good for him. But he also had a lot of bad takes. He has a stack of books like this anyway. Likewise, if Tom is willing to sell Matt his land, that's another friend of mine, and Matt's willing to pay his asking price with money he attained through voluntary transactions, Tom's property can become Matt's. I know, magic. Tom's labor created the property, and Matt's labor brought the money to buy it legitimately. So property couldn't possibly be theft, unless, of course, you engage with Proudhon, his argument, then you might figure out how it is. All right. Again, this is me saying something that, like, oh, ANCAPs aren't the only anarchists. It's important to note, property is a very contentious issue. It's not actually that contentious. It's just, there's a lot of contention between anarchists and ANCAPs. How could it be right? How could it not be aggression to evict squatters from one's land? How could it be right to prevent thirsty people from drinking from a river to which someone just claims ownership? Yes, exactly. So rethink your thoughts. Some anarchists have written scathingly about the assumption implicit in the term property that Tom has absolute freedom to do what he wants with or on his own property. Is that highlighted? Did I highlight that? I remember that. Think of all that could mean. Nowadays, state law, for better or worse, overrides what one chooses to do at home or with one's possessions. But a stateless society would need to ensure warlords or unscrupulous natural resource firms with large tracts of land and militias did not emerge. The alternative, according to Proudhon, is possession, the idea that something's ours only if we're using it. Otherwise, it should belong to everyone. So what am I proposing that? Am I saying we should have possessions as opposed to property? Silly 9 years ago, Chris. Others say the state's necessary to secure property. Yeah, see, great question, Rachel. Is buying food a voluntary transaction? I mean, you have to eat, right? Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. Others say the state is necessary to secure property, and property is the initiation of force. Yeah, I mean, those things are true. However, as we'll see in Chapter 40, that's not necessarily the case. That's only because, I think, if I recall correctly, it's been 9 years, but I think it's because I'm going to say that there are ways of defending property without the state. I think that's all there is to it. A voluntarist would probably say property, far from being theft, is freedom. Again, I could have used Proudhon for this, but I didn't know it well enough. If Tom has the right to defend his property, the fruit of his labor, from all aggression, he also has the right to do as he wishes on it. And no one can legitimately stop him unless he's using violence against others. God, it's like I'm just repeating myself at this point. Moreover, belief in property does not make voluntarious minarchists, as many allege. Doesn't it? Doesn't it turn everybody into their own little, give them their own little kingdom? The state necessarily rules over people. Property has nothing to do with ruling others. Well, okay, not ruling exactly, just ruling the land. When a man expands his property to take the land of others around him, he's guilty of theft. If he forces people to work on his land, he's a slaver. If he doesn't initiate force, he's done nothing wrong. I think I've already explained why that's wrong. Mutualists, am I really going to pretend I understand mutualism now? Reject property disconnected from occupancy and usage and collecting rent on capital standing idle. If you built the house but are now an absentee landlord, you don't actually own it. They also identify the possibility a capitalist closes off a large amount of land and posts guards to shoot trespassers. I don't necessarily disagree with these beliefs and might enjoy living in a community of people who believe this way. I don't want to debate it in this book because the debate, as evinced on innumerable forum discussions online, takes too long. Suffice it to say, in my opinion, the differences in moral principles among anarchists are small, and they must learn to unite. Yeah, but ANCAPs have different goals. It's like, you gotta unite with ANCAPs. I mean, on what exactly? Are we gonna start a business to privatize something that should be shared? Are we gonna, I wouldn't expect them to be at the barricades, like fighting for unions, because they don't believe in unions for the most. I mean, they kind of believe unions are okay, but they might say, like, oh, but they're trying to steal from the owners or something. Like, you get the wage you negotiated. You don't have to get paid more, and that kind of thing. I don't know. It makes it tough for us to work together. So you may have seen this quote before, again, back to Proudhon. What does it mean to be governed? Proudhon said, well, I don't know if I want to read this whole thing. You've probably seen it before, but, to be spied on, indoctrinated, forced, exploited, sold, and betrayed. That is government. That's its justice. That's its morality. Yeah, I mean, that's true. Although, surely by this definition, you could easily argue that corporations are an extension of governance, in this case government, because they do most of these same things, and they will report you if you do something illegal, unless it benefits the corporation. Like, they're watching you, they're inspecting you, they're directing you, they're regulating you, they might indoctrinate you, etc., etc. So I would argue that they're similar, very similar things now. Again, maybe just an extension of the state. If people want to live under the gun, they should be allowed to. Yeah, but we should be trying to free them. However, what if even one person is both peaceful and unwilling? Peaceful means not hurting anyone. What if they are unwilling to give their property to support a system they disagree with? Yeah, I mean, that's okay. What if one person wants to opt out of a system under which they don't want to live? Is it right to disregard that person? Is it right to let the collective decide for the individual against their will? Not if the nap holds. Yeah, this is maybe the positive side of it, I suppose. Like, it's not like the nap is a horrible, like, it's backwards in every possible way. It's the main problem, I'd say, is with property, but also just the fact that that you're going to try to get people to hold to this obscure philosophical principle. Again, it could work in like Ayn Rand's Galt's Gulch or whatever it's called, and it probably did. That probably was the rule there. But I mean, outside of that, it doesn't really reflect. It's not a philosophy that reflects the current world. You know, like we should all adopt the nap. You know, in this world, like. I don't know. Anyway, sorry. It's often claimed that people delegate their power to the representatives, but do they? Are people allowed to do these things for themselves? Are they allowed to inspect, indoctrinate, command, control, and pass laws over fellow citizens? How can they delegate a power or right they don't have? Yeah, that's basically true. Although I'm not sure what this has to do. Like, I could have put this in any of the past chapters. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Politicians like to appeal to the public good, the greater good, or other nebulous ideas. But the public's only merely a collection of individuals. Well, that's pretty simplistic. If the public good overrides the individual good, it can only mean the interests of some individuals take precedence over those of others. Well, that's true. We're often told whom a policy will benefit, while those who will lose, those who pay for the policy, are not mentioned at all. Those who pay for it. Again, it's down to money. Like the biggest injustice is getting your money taken away from you. I can't really agree with that anymore. So this is basically true, but I mean, that doesn't mean that anything the individual does is legit. Well, whatever. I'm not saying that here, so it's okay. But because of our natural abilities to find order, organize, lead, and cooperate, which occur in spontaneous order, see Chapter 5, we don't need to work in the particular systems and hierarchies forced on us. And, well, sort of. When people organize, they may want to make all their decisions on a local level, whatever size that may be. They may want to make those decisions themselves, and find the smaller the locale, the more control they have over decisions and outcomes. People who outsource their problems to government might find they can deal with them more efficiently and effectively in other groups than the nation can. Or using different methods than those imposed on them. Yeah, these are awkward sentences. I've noticed I remember now, I was kind of just out of the academy, and so a lot of this sounds kind of academic. But it tries to sound more academic than he is. An individual or any other minority. Is that how we use minority? Well, that's how Ayn Rand used the word anyway. Is equally deserving of universal rules of morality, as if we could just agree on universal rules. See, in fact, this is the ANCAP again saying morality is universal, or should be. You know, trust me, it pretty much is universal. It's just that people don't realize it yet. You know, people don't understand how universal morality is. Morality must be universal, so saith the ANCAP, because all humans are equally deserving of the basic rights to live according to what they see as right, provided they don't harm others. Well, that's more like saying it should be, but even if it should be, we'd have to agree. And I've often thought, you know, in the past years since being an ANCAP, that to be an ANCAP kind of, it almost to realize the ANCAP world that they envision almost requires like almost everybody else, most other people, to become ANCAPs and adopt the NAP. It's great if everybody else agrees, but they don't have a lot of ways of kind of achieving freedom short of that, you know? Like just evade taxes so you have a little bit more money and more freedom, you know? Whereas really well, anyway, we'll get to solutions in a month or two when we get to the end. But I mean, we could be doing things like seceding, or I mean, remember what happened in Minneapolis a couple of years ago? Like, we could be doing that too. I think it was Minneapolis. Anyway, like this, there's lots of things we could be doing. To when we go out there in the streets, when we organize, which is what people should be doing. You know. Whereas ANCAPs don't even really encourage that. They say, like, think about this philosophy, and then okay, now I'm going to go, build my own farm out in the wilderness somewhere. It's not super useful. A principle can scarcely be said to be moral if it applies double standards, affording some people certain rights over others. Well, is that the basis for morality? I don't know, because I don't even try to explain it. I just go, moral this and moral that. If a system privileges the majority, giving them rights to deprive the minority of its life, freedom, or anything it acquired through voluntary means, it's immoral. Another thing I wouldn't be talking about now is majority and minority. Not that it's, like, politically incorrect or anything. More because this is another kind of ANCAP trope. It's the kind of strict individualism that, again, of Ayn Rand, actually. Not only her, obviously, but it kind of goes back to Ayn Rand, because she would say, the individual is the smallest minority. And in a way, that's true, but it's so not what we mean when we talk about that, Like, there are so many... the problem is not that the majority is forcing you to do things, even though it is. Like, it is part of the problem, but it's not necessarily the problem. It's not about the majority, necessarily. I mean, it may be if you had a homogeneous society, then you could talk about majorities versus the individual or something. But most people don't live in a very homogeneous society, and people who are considered minorities tend to have to put up with all kinds of garbage. It's not necessarily because of the majority. And I mean, it's possible in this case I was thinking like say white Americans or something, or white Canadians as the majority, but are they still? And is it right to continue to call them that? I don't know. Or was I just thinking about individuals? Gandhi, himself an anarchist, well, probably not quite an anarchist, but I was claiming him as an ANCAP. Gandhi once said, "In matters of conscience, the law of the majority has no place." Good for him. Thus, if a man doesn't permit others to rule him, no matter how many they are, they should not. Well said, Chris. Communists and syndicalists say bosses are masters, therefore employees are slaves. But if one has the ability to leave the job and not worry about being subject to violence as a result, the boss is not a master. Don't worry, I'm covering it. Moreover, when people are free to choose their employment, grow their own food, and use their chosen currency, bosses are unnecessary. All right. This is an interesting claim. I certainly used to believe that. All ANCAPs will tell you that, right? The thing is, this is simply not accurate. Again, we're talking about like a theoretical, non-existent, purely hypothetical kind of situation. Well, let's say theoretical, because it could happen. Like you can just leave the job and there's no result. Yeah, like you don't face violence for leaving the job per se, or looking for another job per se. You face violence for not having the money that the job provides. Job provides this money so you can continue to live. And if you don't have that job, for many people, you don't have that job, and you can't necessarily find another after all. So you might just have to end up starving in the street or something. And that's kind of the result of not having a job. Again, not necessarily. You might be able to find another job, sure. But it depends very much on the person, because what if you're living paycheck to paycheck? You lose your job, you're screwed. And it happens to people every day. So what's even the point of this kind of, this extremely abstract philosophy that isn't related to the real world, that doesn't make reference to the real world? Like, yeah, the boss isn't technically the master. The system is the master, and the boss works for the system. Like, it's kind of almost like splitting hairs. When people are free to choose their employment, grow their own food, and use their chosen currency, bosses are unnecessary. Well, unless they still need to use money. Sorry. Because there will still be bosses saying, hey, no, you can have this money, sure. But you gotta work for me. Do everything I say, and be here on time. Alright, we're running low. Let's see how much more there is to this. Oh, God, I just keep writing, don't I? Yeah, I'll do all this stuff tomorrow, I guess. But I'll keep going a little bit for now. Let's look at the myth of the social contract. Yeah, that's great. For the past 300 years, man, it's always man. I've changed my writing since then. Humans have heard the suggestions of a wide variety of philosophers. One influential idea was the social contract. I think it's commonly misunderstood what the social contract is. And this, I think, pretty much is what it is, actually. Even though a lot of people would say, no, that's not what it is. It pretty much is. Social contract is the people in a given territory submit to the will of the state. In return, the state provides protection and services to people. That is pretty much what the social contract is. A lot of people say, like, we have a social contract, people leave each other alone, create order or something. Like, no, that's really not what the social contract is. But what is a contract? A contract's an agreement consciously and willingly entered into by two or more parties. No one signed a contract agreeing to submit to all laws passed by politicians. It's irrelevant whether the politicians were elected or not, or by how many votes. Democracy or dictatorship, if an individual is not willing to submit to this so-called contract, there's nothing moral about forcing them into it. Yeah, I mean, I can more or less agree with that. I think we could put less emphasis on contracts than ANCAPs tend to, because they kind of think of everything as being part of a contract, because, like, because if you signed a contract, then, you have to abide by it, or, yeah, I mean, I kind of think a lot in terms of norms nowadays, that norms are a better system of governance, but that's kind of a longer story. Then I talk about Lysander Spooner and the book No Treason, The Constitution, No Authority. I definitely still like this book. I would recommend it if you haven't read it. You might already figure it out. But it does use a lot of logic. With his expert logic, Lysander Spooner points out the irrelevance of the social contract as a contract. The Constitution of the United States has no inherent obligation or authority, he begins. And he's right. After all, I've never been asked if I would like to follow any law, nor have I seen this contract apparently signed on my behalf. I still might make this argument. It will probably sound similar to all this. For this contract to be moral, according to the NAP, or me, every single citizen of every country would have to consent to living under the country's legal system. It's null for anyone who doesn't sign it. And yet, because a small group of men wrote a document over 200 years ago, 300 million people, Americans, are subject to the violence of every single law passed by a small clique of decision makers. The notion of the social contract suits the state, because there's no chance to opt out of and end the contract. But it doesn't suit the dissenting individual or persecuted minority, and it clearly isn't a contract. Taxation is the initiation of force. So as I've said before, I don't know how much I would even get into taxation in a book if I wrote one now. There's a whole, like, not only do I talk about it here, but there's also a chapter on it, a whole chapter, where I talk about why taxation is theft. And being an anarchist to this day, what I find, the only problem with my taxation arguments is kind of the way that I argue it, and the way I phrase it, and the emphasis, and so on. And I could have taken it a lot further. I could definitely have taken it into historical territory. Well, more than I already do in that chapter, because, so for example, in lots of, I don't know, lots of Africa, most of Africa, for example, the European colonizers would like institute a tax that had to be paid, like a poll tax or whatever they call it, and then people will be like, well, we don't, why should we pay that? But you have to pay the tax, right? And to get the money to pay the tax, you have to work in the mines, or you have to work on our fields, or something like that. And that's how you're going to get money. And that's kind of just a modern, well, let's say a more modern and colonial way of doing what they had already done in European countries. They'd already done that. They'd already said, like, you're going to have to pay taxes, and you're going to have to use this currency and work for us, and so on, if you want to be able to do that. Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, this part's kind of still basically true. Taxation is the initiation of force. It is, by the state. Although you could just say the state is the initiation of force, and taxation sustains the state. I don't know. It could be just semantics. If any person being taxed is unwilling to pay taxes, or is unwilling to pay as much as they are paying, taxes are force, which means they are. Those certain forms of small governments have been funded by voluntary contributions. Any other way a government acquires its funding necessitates the threat of violence. Yeah, I said that because I heard Ron Paul say it once, and I've never seen an example of it. If you know of examples like that, then okay, great, tell me. I'd love to know. I've really never actually heard of an example. And if you read Oppenheimer's treatise on the state, you can see that there isn't really any chance that there was. I don't see how there could have been. There couldn't be like a voluntarily funded state. There couldn't be a state that kind of works for all the people. There couldn't be a state that arose because the people wanted it to. Like, it just, no states have ever functioned that way, and it couldn't, like, evolve. You can't, like a local club would never evolve into a state, or a local tribe even. It's simply not how it works. There's always been some kind of aggression, some kind of, like, dispossession and violence and expropriation that's taken it. Yeah, Egyptians and Carthaginians, there you go. Yeah, see, I don't know that history. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's happened, like, just everywhere, because I think that's why we all use money, because we were kind of forced to use it. I just don't know the history of every different place where they've done that. All right, let's finish this page. How about to say everyone should be forced to pay taxes, or else they shouldn't be allowed to use the services government provides, has things backwards. Yeah, that's true. But I'm kind of just going through the simplest arguments. Does statism imply original sin because you can't opt out? If not, the onus is on those forcing others and those supporting the force of others to persuade the people they should be willing to submit to compulsion under the threat of violence and to ask them if they consent. Yeah, I mean, this is just a long way of me saying that we don't consent. And I don't even know if there's any much point in belaboring that point, because I've already made a whole video on it. You can look up if you like. Likewise, it doesn't follow that someone who doesn't like the system should just move, or that taxes are analogous to rent. Ooh, slow down. These are these are two very different arguments coming from right and left field, respectively. Yeah. Like, let's see. So, should they move? No, they shouldn't have to move just because they don't like the system. If they don't like the system here, they're probably not going to like it anywhere else. You shouldn't have to move. It's them that are the problem. But this part, I know taxes. I think you could say they're analogous to rent. That it's a tax for kind of living somewhere. A tax for not owning your own home. I think you could easily make that argument. I don't here, but easily make that argument. We'll probably talk about it closer to the section on taxation. We'll stop for now. There's a couple pages left in this chapter. Like I've said, I'll probably be doing this for another couple of months. I'd like to really go through the whole book, partly out of nostalgia, but also to really not only, like, obviously I'm saying everything wrong with ancaps, but I'm also getting the chance to say everything right with what I think now. So I'm personally enjoying it, and I'm really glad that you're all here for me to help out and give your comments, because just by being just by commenting, just by being here in the stream, like it helps. It really helps. You're teaching me stuff. Just a few comments teaches me stuff, and if I'm wrong about anything, let me know. So thanks everybody so much for being here. Hope you can come again tomorrow. I'll be here tomorrow, same time, most likely. Hope to see you then. Have a great day.